Good evening. If I could call this meeting to order. If we could please take a moment of silence for prayer or reflection. Thank you.
Good evening. Our first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda.
Any additions? All right, seeing none.
Next, we have item 3.1, the minutes of the September 4th regular Medicine Hat City Council meeting on page 3.
Any errors, omissions? Okay, seeing none, we'll accept the minutes.
Under reports, item 4.1 is the Development and Infrastructure Committee meeting of September 5th, 2018 on page 6. And item number 1, sales and pricing strategy for various infill properties, is for adoption. Item number 2 is school and playground trial results for information.
Mr. Mayor, I have to call pecuniary on number 1, please.
Right, so if we could
Separate
just,
it, please.
if we could deal with number 2
Okay.
first, if council is agreeable to that. All right, any, we can get.
I'll move that report for adoption and information.
Second. Thank you. Any questions or comments on item number 2, school and playground trial zones? Trial results, sorry. Councillor Friesen?
Well, Your Worship, this is interesting. I was on this committee the first time when the representation was made by the Catholic School Board in 2016, I think. And there certainly has been some work done in that regard with the studies we've done so far. So I just wondered, and I'm not sure, perhaps to the committee chair or this acting CAO, but we've been looking at similar results in other communities and examining what that means for them. And do you have anything to add in terms of what the public community engagement, I guess, could look like? Any potential upcoming changes being considered for increased safety for children in playground and school zones, those kinds of things?
Who is your question directed?
Well, I'm not sure. I think I'll aim for the acting CAO since that puts them right on the spot. And then maybe the committee chair might be able to say something too.
Yeah, through the chair, this is here for information to close out this work. I would say the results that we experienced in the city are fairly consistent with what was experienced elsewhere. You'll note the data suggests that we aren't seeing marked safety improvement for any particular measure. We'll continue to look at some of the traffic calming measures that can be designed into the street, so the size and width of the street. Sight lines are obviously a consideration, but we don't see ourselves moving with any haste to implement any of these particular measures on a go-forward basis, but are always observing what is occurring elsewhere and trying to bring practices to Medicine Hat that would improve safety for pedestrian traffic.
And if I could follow up, some of the comments I get from people are around school playground areas where they are fenced, and yet the same speed limit is there. Now, I know I've asked about this several times in the past, and when those areas were being developed, and some were around crosswalks and sight lines and those kinds of things. I'm just wondering. I want children to be safe. I also have to wonder, though, sometimes if that continuous slowing down, especially when they're fenced, doesn't create some other traffic, I don't know, some other traffic issues. So do you have anything to add about that?
I'll venture out there, excuse me, and then if Commissioner Schwarzenberger wants to add anything, he can jump in. I think our traffic engineers look at a number of factors when considering what they're going to put in place. So signage, flashing signs, fencing, sight lines, traffic volume, type of pedestrian use is there, what's the playground use, what age demographics there. So they have a whole lot of considerations that go into play when they're responding to it. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all solution in any particular area, and they continue to do that. So you've seen some adjustments on where posted speed limit changes and transitions may have moved based on all those factors, and what they've done with mobile signage that shows speed limits for traffic. So they're utilizing a number of these things and will continue to do so based on need. So I don't know if there's anything.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Samraj?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question for the CAO. I understand why staff weren't going to go ahead with any of these implementations because the effect was pretty negligible. I guess I'm curious why we would even spend $8,000, even if it's a small amount, if it's shown not to decrease speed in any way.
Are you talking about to
There-
do the study or
No,
some implementation?
So they had a bunch of options there about what it would cost to put some of these traffic calming measures in, but none of them were shown to be make any much of an impact. And then lower on, they said there was an ongoing program of $8,000 to use the speed meter throughout the city. But I guess I'm curious about why we would even spend that.
Through the chair, I think just what I was touching on, where they see for various reasons in that particular area, maybe a need for enhanced mitigation efforts, they will continue to deploy those, but aren't looking to have these measures deployed in every single playground across the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dominowski?
Well, Your Worship, I don't think it's too much of a secret that in my day job, I'm a school principal. So my comments aren't to question the results tonight, but I will say, in my 22 years as an educator, and my observations over that time, and in relation to some of the speed or traffic calming measures that have been employed or deployed throughout the city in some measured way, and even in a rotational way, it's at least in my passing observation that I have seen improvements. It's difficult to challenge data when it's been measured in a formal way, but I can tell you as an educator in my passing observations, it appears to me very clearly that these have a measured response that obviously is favorable to children in these areas. I obviously am not a spokesperson for Medicine Hat Catholic, whom I work for, or Public 76, but I can tell you in my observations. So I guess my point is that we embarked on this study, and I remember it very well, and I supported it. My fear is that if we allow the results like this to come forward and be presented in a formal way, and to some extent it discounts, I guess, any future opportunities that might be needed. Having said that, I know the city does care about speed monitoring or doing what they can to mitigate that, and will in a limited way deploy signage, those speed signs, et cetera, as necessary. I can even, if I can go back a step before this experiment or this speed mitigation attempt was put in place, I know that the city had some of those speed signs they would put out on a rotational basis, and again, I would observe speed reduction, or at least a higher level of observed speed reduction. In the end, where they're measured, perhaps the end result was negligible, as it says here, but the perception, the monitoring, the observation of people being in a school zone and the fact that there's a need to slow down, I believe was there in spades, and so I'm a little bit disappointed, but at the same time, I know that these things come with a cost, and again, if the results weren't as indicated here, there would probably be a different recommendation. But I guess in my parting comment is that I hope that this doesn't color our desire or our ability to respond in the future as things present as a problem. Because I would imagine that in some cases and in some schools in particular roadways, there will always be a higher level of need for monitoring, and that doesn't discount the fact that the police service will do their part as well. But I just, my fear is that this will be put into the archives as an experiment that was done that had negligible results, and therefore, in the future, as things present themselves, there may be a lack of desire or less desirable response because of that. So, in saying that, I guess I recognize the cost factor, and I'm just hopeful that in the future we can continue to deploy measures that as necessary, and that be highlighted equally to the data presented tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Varga.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have two questions, I guess. I guess it would have been interesting to see through this survey how many tickets were given out on these certain areas at this time. My other question is, what is benchmarking sites were they surveyed? What is that, benchmarking sites?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, that's simply part of the methodology where before the actual changes in the implementation of the trials themselves, then baseline traffic volumes and speeds were measured to create something to measure against, see if change was affected.
Okay. I just didn't understand what it was. All the other ones I know, but benchmarking sites, I guess I wanted some information on that, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turnbull.
Thank you, Your Worship. So through the chair to either Councillor Friesen or Councillor Dubanowski, it would be interesting to know, since you're both on the Police Commission, exactly how many tickets were handed out before and after photo radar. Because I think the reason we're seeing such lower speeds is the fact that photo radar is around almost always in school zones, and that is almost better than a sign saying don't speed.
Yep.
We don't know that off the top of our head, but we can sure find out for you. We keep pretty accurate statistics on all of those zones, and particularly those with photo radar. So yeah, it would be an interesting comparison. We'll find out for you.
Thank you.
Just
So
on that, Your Worship, I mean, we've seen the data come back through the Police Commission reports that the monitoring has gone up significantly. The issuance of tickets has gone down, I won't use as big a word dramatically, but overall, it would appear, if we're using the data before us, that it has an impact for sure.
Well, in fact, it was to your point. I was trying to say that if you have a fear that further down the road we won't take different initiatives, we do have to recognize that we spend a lot of money on photo radar, and of course we collect a lot of taxes, no question. But so I think that's part of the whole equation. If we before we get in and spend a lot of money on more studies, is also take a look at how effective photo radar has been to bring us to where we are today.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on item number 2? Okay, well, we have a motion for information on that item, if we could vote. And that was unanimous. Councillor Varga, if you'd like to just declare, Councillor Varga, could you declare your interest and why?
I declare a pecuniary on this next item.
Why? Just,
Why?
well, you can be somewhat vague.
Just a chance, what do I say?
Your employment,
Yeah, we're looking maybe to purchase one of these.
okay, you can be that specific, okay. All right, if we could deal with item number 1 for adoption. Any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, if we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you.
Our next item is item 4.2 under reports, Energy and Utilities Committee meeting of September 6th, and this report is for information and page 22 of your packet.
I'll move that report for information.
Second.
Any comments? All right, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Our next report, item 4.3, the Corporate Services Committee meeting of September 11th on page 28, and this is for information.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? Well, no, let's just call the question. That was unanimous, thank you.
Our next report, item 4.4, Administrative Committee meeting of September 12th, and that's on page 29, and this report is for adoption.
Second.
Any comments? Councillor McIntosh?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just if I could get some clarification from Commissioner Lentz. The report indicates that it became very difficult to find a replacement unit. Could you explain why it's so challenging for the city to actually track one of these down when we need one?
Through the chair to Councillor McIntosh. These are our oldest units that we have in the city. These are quite vintage and they're not in production anymore. There are upgrades to these units, so it does become more difficult to find spares for these units. We can still get them rebuilt. However, an actual unit itself is very difficult to come by. So when this opportunity came up to purchase one of these units, we jumped on it because it helps our long-range plans and strategies and helps us to take these units out to 2028.
Thank you. Councillor Hirsch?
Just want to express my support for the purchase and remind, I guess, the public too, that this was a budgeted item. It got to the point where it was end of life, and sure enough, it was end of life. So happy in terms of the city's use and care of the infrastructure, quite frankly. There's always that red line between overusing an asset to the point where, and I'll just say nickel and dimes you, even to the point where that's a fairly vintage model. So obviously we did get the miles out of it. So even though it's a lot of money, I recognize that it is budgeted. It is just the cost of doing business that we're in. So I'm pleased to see it, and I want to thank staff for the utilization and the smart use of our assets. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turnbull.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I certainly agree with Councillor Hirsch. This is a business unit, and it makes a profit. And unfortunately, or fortunately, any business is required to ensure that it reaches its ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is to provide electricity with no downtimes. And as you know, we've got Hut 8 coming to town, selling more electricity. We've got Aurora coming next year. So it's even more important that as a business unit, that we make the right decisions to ensure that we have adequate equipment that is responding. So I know sometimes, and I was including one of them, who would sit and watch and read the paper about city council and say, oh my gosh, they're spending another $10 million. Wow, they must have a money tree. This is a really, really smart decision that was made by Genco, and I think you're going to be very pleased. Our profit margins are increasing over the previous years because we have a sound business plan. We're operating Genco like ATCO operates theirs, as NMAX operates theirs, as Capital Power out of Edmonton operates theirs. So I can assure you, because I'm probably the most right-wing conservative when it comes to spending money there is in the city of Medicine Hat. But you can't run a business and not reinvest. You cannot allow your equipment to get so old that you put in jeopardy the very business that supports those profits. So again, I thank Commissioner Lentz for that decision too.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? If we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you. Seeing no more business.
What, if I could, one moment. It's not a point of order.
Okay.
It's not a point of order, and I should have said something at the beginning. I think we have a number of people here in the gallery tonight that don't usually join us at council, and I'm not sure why you're here, but given the pictures, I suspect you might be here about a safe consumption site or loved ones that you have. And I know it's not on the agenda, and I think that might be because there's been some confusion about when it might be on an agenda that we have. And so I feel badly if we do not recognize you and recognize your loved ones. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Seeing no more business before this council, we're adjourned.